Jon Meacham is the author of the instantly and justly celebrated George Herbert Walker Bush biography, Destiny and Power. He joins us now from Philadelphia. Jon, so good to see you.
Huntley and Brinkley, how are y'all?
Yeah, very well, sir. Thank you. So, Jon, we're going to do a thing as authors ourselves. This is the kind of question that we always wish someone would ask when we're in the midst of promoting a book, but never get asked. Okay, so here it is. What stories from this book that you consider important have you not had a chance to talk about yet?
I do appreciate that. One of the things that I find so fascinating is whoever was hiring the Andover faculty in the 1930s was brilliant, because if you read George Herbert Walker Bush's teacher reports, you find that he basically, the character of the man was almost entirely set from the time he was 14 until he was 18. He got overly intense about everything. He worked hard but didn't want anyone to know it. He worried a great deal but covered it up with a great amount of charm, an ability to reach out to his classmates. He was a heroic figure at the school, famously helped a kid who was being picked on. He said, "Knock it off," and the kid later said, "You know, who just saved me?" And they said, "Well, that's Poppy Bush. He's the best kid in the whole school." So basically, the entire character of the man was formed long before he entered public life.
Jon, you did something that's kind of unusual in a book like this, which is you went to some of the non-main characters besides President Bush 41 and told them what you had and kind of got their reaction, reporting within the book itself. But since the book came out, there have been additional reactions. Secretary Rumsfeld has reacted. Dick Cheney's reacted. Talk about sort of what things have occurred since the book came out, whether they surprised you or not, but they sort of have advanced the story beyond what you put within the hardcover pages.
Well, yeah, I did go to everybody. I think Cheney's been a great sport. I think he's been gentlemanly about it. He sort of embraced the iron ass comment that 41 made about him.
He's a proud iron ass.
And I think, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if you think about it, I mean, actually, if you're Dick Cheney, given what Peter Baker reported in Days of Fire and what a lot of us have followed, it kind of puts Cheney back in the center of the conversation in a way that he had not been in the past couple of years. So I think that might be part of what's going on. On Rumsfeld, I think Rumsfeld sort of proved the point. He on the record, he declined to comment. We had two conversations about what President Bush had said about him. To me, he didn't want to comment on the record. Then his statement was that President Bush is getting up in years. But the problem is that Bush's comments about his being arrogant, iron ass, not being reflective enough, were comments made first in October 2008, and then repeated again over several different years. So in a way, I think that Rumsfeld's, I guess it's passive-aggressive, maybe it's just aggressive, reaction puts a capper on what has been one of the great rivalries in modern American politics, which is the Rumsfeld versus Bush.
Right, let's just unpack, though, this thing, which got a lot of attention in the beginning, which is Bush 41 basically says, from where I sat, Cheney and Rumsfeld had too much influence. They were too bellicose, and that influenced my son. Bush 43 says, you know, I love my dad. I don't really want to challenge my dad, but I called the shots. So did Bush 41 have enough data to make this judgment? Is this an informed judgment that he passed on to you, or was this just a father kind of imposing his view of Cheney and Rumsfeld on the events, trying to get his son off the hook a little bit?
I don't think he was trying to get it off his hook, and I don't think he had much more data than a lot of us had. I think one of the factors that hasn't gotten a lot of attention is I think that President Bush 41 reads the New York Times every day, and he follows the he follows the news. He followed the commentary, and particularly as things were so bad in Iraq in 06, 07, before the surge. And I think that it was an informed observation, given that he knew everyone. Right. But to me, one of the very interesting things is both 43 told me and 41 told me that they had never had this conversation. He had never said, you know what, I think Cheney is exacerbating
Why not?
the image.
Why wouldn't they have had that conversation?
two things. I think two tributaries came together. One is that 41 was incredibly deferential to every president who ever held the office, starting with Lyndon Johnson. When he's a Republican congressman from Texas, he said, "I'm never going to attack you personally." I don't know that Lyndon Johnson was that worried about whether he was going to be attacked personally. That's in Barbara's diary that he went up to him and said that. Nixon, Ford, even Carter, because Bush left the door open to being kept on as CIA director to keep the job from being seen as one that shifted from administrations. And then famously, almost to the point of, as Gary Trudeau put it memorably in Doonesbury, almost putting his manhood in a blind trust by being so deferential to Reagan. So he was... 41's default position is you don't complicate the life of a president. Right. All right, so then you go to 43. And 43, you all know this, I defy anybody to spend 4, 5, 6 minutes around George W. Bush and think that he wasn't totally in charge of whatever situation he wanted to be in charge of. And frankly, he believed he was getting the advice he needed to get. So he asked his father about personnel. He asked him about George Tenet. If you read decision points very carefully, there are a number of cases where he asked his father's counsel, including whether or not Jim Baker might come in 2005 and replace Rumsfeld, including the ultimate appointment of Bob Gates to that job in the fall of 2006. And I said to President Bush 43 in an interview that I had a theory that he protested too much about how little he asked his father for fear of appearing overly dependent on the previous generation. And 43 said, well, that's not a bad observation, which I took as a resounding yes.
Yes, right.
I think they just don't, I really believe that they did not have long, serious conversations about policy or substance.
Let me ask you, John, about a moment in the book. We just talked to Vin Weber a little earlier on the show. You have a scene in the book where Vin Weber and Newt Gingrich go to visit George Herbert Walker Bush in the White House when they are kind of the ascendant force in what is the new face of the Republican Party. It's a small story, but it seems really kind of freighted with a lot of meaning to me as I read it. So talk about that story and what it meant to you, what you think it means.
I thought it was absolutely critical. Thank you for that. Thank you for raising that. I should have mentioned that one before. So the line about a wing of a butterfly starts a hurricane. So let's take one step back here, and this is the one forum where people would probably care. So John Tower fails to be confirmed as Secretary of Defense. Right. Bush 41 reaches out to Dick Cheney, pulls him out of the House leadership. He becomes Secretary of Defense, leaving the House Republican whip job open. Vin Weber of Minnesota runs the campaign within the caucus for his friend Newt Gingrich. Gingrich is elected, put in the House leadership, a series of events that ultimately leads, of course, to 1994 and Gingrich becoming Speaker. Interesting to think about what might have happened if Cheney had stayed in the House leadership.
Right.
So put that to one side. So Bush calls Gingrich when he's elected to the whipdom, and invites not only Gingrich, but Vin Weber. And Weber said to me, what other president would even think about inviting your campaign manager? They have a beer upstairs in the residence with John Sununu, George Bush, Vin Weber, Newt Gingrich. And they can tell, Weber and Gingrich can tell that Bush wants to say something but can't quite get it out. And so as they're leaving, Congressman Weber says, Mr. President, tell us what worries you most about us. And Bush said, without hesitation, I worry that your idealism might sometimes get in the way of what I think of as sound governance. And Weber said he always credited Bush for using the word idealism. He didn't say ideology, he didn't say purity, he didn't say nuttiness, he didn't say inflexibility. And there's a direct line from that conversation to the 1990 budget deal. It's the third week of June 1990 when Bush puts out the press release. Remember, he doesn't announce it. He doesn't announce that he's breaking the one memorable phrase of his public life, read my lips, no new taxes, to that point. They stick the press release up on the bulletin board. And then for 3 long days, Bush never comes out and explains why he put the tax increases back on the table. Weber and Gingrich find out about it from reporters. And it instantly goes into Weber's mind instantly goes back to that moment that this is what he was talking about. That, in fact, Bush was believed that sound governance ultimately would probably mean more taxes to bring the Democrats along, to get spending caps, pay-go rules. And I think in many ways that moment is the beginning of, or certainly a critical chapter in the politics we have now.